A lone German shepherd emerged from the drifting fog, limping on one paw, his fur matted with dried mud and crusted blood. He wasn't supposed to return here, not after everything. Beyond the row of cottonwoods, the tracks curved into a blind turn, and beside that stretch of cold steel, 2 police officers lay bound, their throats bitten by rope, left to vanish beneath the next passing train. No one saw the dog coming. No one believed he'd come back. But he remembered their scent. He remembered what loyalty meant when the world turned its back. What followed would break hearts and renew faith in second chances for the forgotten. Before we begin, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Drop your country below. And if you believe no person or animal deserves to be abandoned, hit subscribe, because this story might just remind you that miracles still walk among us. The storm had rolled past without drama, rinsing Ashton City clean and leaving the air cool enough to taste the steel of it. The small mountain town lay tucked between longleaf pines and rusted rail lines, where dusk arrived gently, like a quiet blessing. A thin breeze brushed through the trees, carrying the scent of iron, rain, and sunburned grass. Along a maintenance path running parallel to the tracks, Ethan Cole moved with the kind of quiet that comes from long years of listening. He was 38, tall, lean, his shoulders broad beneath a weathered Marine uniform that still fit like memory. His face was clean-shaven, jaw square and steady, hazel eyes calm but watchful beneath dark brown hair parted neatly to one side, streaked faintly with gray. His sleeves were rolled with precision, his name tape faded but intact, his tan combat boots scuffed from years of walking ground most men avoided. Ethan carried himself like a man who never forgot to scan the edges of things, not because he expected danger, but because he had learned what came when you didn't. The uniform wasn't for show. It was the last skin that ever truly fit him, a second identity he couldn't quite shed, no matter how far from war he walked. Tonight, he came here for the same reason he sometimes walked at 2 a.m., because silence still held echoes of explosions if he didn't meet it halfway. Beside him padded Rex, his 5-year-old German shepherd, black and tan, 75 pounds of muscle, discipline, and something more, patience that felt ancient. A notch cut through his right ear from a barbed wire scuffle the previous winter, his coat catching the dying light like wet stone. He moved without a leash, needing none. His posture was straight, composed, every motion purposeful. His eyes, amber, keen, intelligent, missed nothing. Rex was a dog, yes, but also a partner. He was the one who pressed his shoulder against Ethan's leg when nightmares cracked open the night. Loyal without question, gentle with children, cautious with pride, and fearless without cruelty. There was nothing exaggerated about him, just an unspoken strength that waited, watched, and struck only when it had to. To the south, the faint shimmer of city lights began to thread the horizon. North and west lay only forest and pine, shadows stretching long and thin. Ethan paused at a break in the fence where a side trail met the ballast, chin raised, ears open to the rhythm of the night. The Marines had taught him that the world always announced itself before it arrived, the tremor before helicopter blades, the silence of birds before men appeared. And then, from the quiet, came a sound, a half-muffled cry, strangled and wrong, like someone trying to scream through fabric. Ethan's pulse jumped. Rex's head whipped left, ears pricked sharply toward the source. A low growl rumbled in the shepherd's chest, not anger, but warning. "You hear it," Ethan whispered, though he didn't need confirmation. He placed 2 fingers lightly on Rex's shoulder, their silent signal, and they moved as one. They followed the gravel path toward a shallow cut in the land where the rails carved straight through the cottonwoods. The sound came again, faint, desperate, muffled, like breath straining against burlap. Ethan knew that sound. It echoed something buried deep inside him. He'd heard it once before, years ago, when his friend's wrists were zip-tied behind a wall that smelled of dust and diesel, when the night screamed and the world arrived 3 seconds too late. That memory sat heavy under his ribs, waiting to be recalled. He tasted it now like grit between his teeth. Rex trotted a pace ahead, nose low, inhaling, exhaling, parsing the layers of scent. The last of the sunlight went copper across the rails. And there, in that molten light, Ethan saw them, two figures lying side by side, too close to the track for safety. Their ankles and wrists were bound with coarse rope, burlap sacks knotted tight around their heads. Simple. Cruel. Efficient. Whoever had done this had known exactly how far to go before death. The man nearest to Ethan was broad across the shoulders, his chest heavy and solid. Even in distress, his strength showed through. Ethan recognized him, Officer Daniel Brooks, 41, 6'2", African-American, cropped hair dusted with gray, built like a man who'd spent years stepping into danger before anyone else. His reputation was legend in Ashton, calm as oak, steady as sunrise. The kind of officer who never shouted in a crisis, who knelt to comfort scared kids, who'd quietly pay for a car seat and install it himself. Now, his uniform shirt was torn, his breathing shallow beneath the sack, his wrists raw from struggling. Beside him lay Officer Kevin Hayes, 30, white, wiry and long-limbed, with the quick reflexes of a runner and the restless eyes of someone who'd learned humor as a defense. Rookie once, now Brooks's partner. The kind who remembered birthdays, who'd stop a patrol car to buy lemonade from kids on the sidewalk. Tonight, his bracelet, a frayed piece of thread his sister had made when he graduated the academy, was stained dark with grime. His fingers were discolored from lack of blood flow. Both men were bruised, torn, and gasping, but alive. Thank God, Ethan murmured. Brooks fought weakly against the sack, his chest heaving. Rex growled low, his body tense, every hair along his spine upright. Easy, Ethan whispered, palm down, eyes scanning the area. Tire tracks still fresh, boot prints pressed deep in the mud, cigarette ash crushed into the ground. The faint pivot mark of a heel, someone had stood right there, watching. The rails began to hum, faintly at first, a whisper of an oncoming train. In the distance, a horn wailed, two long, one short, one long, the pattern burned into Ethan's memory. He crouched beside Hayes first, careful not to startle him. Rex crept forward, nose brushing the burlap, inhaling the overlapping scents, motor oil, pine sap, metallic blood, fear. The dog let out a deep, guttural sound, not a bark, not a whine, a verdict. Danger close. Time short. Ethan's mind clicked into order. Sacks first. Neck second. Wrists third. Ankles last. Always in sequence. Always the same. He pressed a steady hand on Hayes's shoulder. Officer, I'm Ethan Cole, former Marine. My dog's name is Rex. We're getting you out. A shudder passed through the younger man's body, fear giving way to fragile hope. The horn sounded again, closer. The rails beneath Ethan's boots began to sing. He felt his heartbeat slow, the way it always had before battle, as he reached into his pocket for the folding knife that had followed him through 2 deployments. He studied the knot, a cruel constrictor, doubled back, meant to choke rather than tie. Rex, he murmured. The shepherd locked eyes with him, tense, silent, waiting for command. Watch. The dog planted himself over Brooks, body braced, head low, growl rumbling like distant thunder. Brooks, half-conscious, stilled beneath that presence, instinctively sensing protection. The crossing bell clanged in rhythm with the rising horn, a metallic heartbeat that filled the night. Ethan flicked open the knife with a practiced motion. The click of the blade locking was sharp, decisive, like the world snapping into focus. He measured the rope's grain, felt its tension, counted breaths, in 2, hold, out 2, hold. Time was collapsing. The air itself felt tight. The train's light began to pierce the fog ahead, a pale glare bending through the trees. Ethan's hand steadied. We're doing this, he whispered, not to Hayes, not to Brooks, but to himself. To the ghosts that had once watched him fail. He pressed the blade to the knot, sawing gently. Fibers strained, frayed, then snapped. The rope loosened. Burlap shifted. A gasp broke free beneath it, harsh, broken, but alive. "Good," Ethan breathed. "Good." Rex lunged forward, teeth gripping the sack, yanking hard until it tore upward. Air hit Hayes's face like salvation. The young officer coughed violently, eyes rolling before they found Ethan's. "You're okay," Ethan barked. "Stay with me. No time to rest." Brooks was next. His chest barely moved now. Ethan darted to him, blade flashing in rhythm with the horn's roar. Rex moved instantly, paws on Brooks's shoulders, grounding him with weight and presence. "Not again," Ethan hissed through gritted teeth, slicing through the second rope. "Not this time." With a final pull, the cord gave way. Rex tore the sack free. Brooks gasped violently, drawing air like a drowning man breaching the surface. The horn screamed, the train's headlight was almost on them. Ethan cut through wrist ropes, then ankles. Brooks's huge body convulsed, his muscles still bound by shock. "Move!" Ethan shouted, dragging both men by sheer will. Hayes tried to crawl, his voice rasping, "Go," but Ethan ignored him, grabbing him by the collar and pulling. Rex bit into Hayes's pant leg, tugging with all his strength. Together, the three, man, and dog, became a machine of survival. The rails beneath them glowed white. The train thundered into view, a roaring beast of iron and fire. Ethan's shoulders burned. He hauled harder, lungs splitting. The heat of the passing locomotive kissed his neck as it screamed past, a storm of steel and smoke. They dove into the ditch just as it tore by, the ground trembling under the weight. Grit and leaves flew into the air. Ethan threw himself over both officers, shielding them as Rex crouched at his side, teeth bared, eyes fierce. The world became sound, metal, wind, and fury, and then silence. When the last car vanished into the horizon, Ethan lifted his head. Brooks was coughing. Hayes was breathing. Both men were alive. "Good," Ethan muttered, his voice shaking. "You're alive." He looked to Rex, the shepherd's chest rose and fell fast, his fur matted with dust, but his eyes glowed, sharp and sure. "Good boy," Ethan whispered. And in Rex's steady gaze, there was no pride, only readiness. Because the night was not done yet. The fields beyond the tracks lay still beneath a faint wash of moonlight, but Ethan Cole knew better than to trust quiet. Quiet didn't mean safe, it meant waiting. His arms burned from dragging the two officers clear, but he didn't stop until they were well off the rail line. Rex trotted beside him, black and tan coat dulled by dirt, tail low, nose twitching at the wind. Every sound mattered now, the rustle of leaves, the sigh of grass, even the crack of a twig in the distance. The German shepherd's instincts hummed like a wire under tension. Ethan half-carried, half-guided Officer Daniel Brooks, the larger of the two men. Brooks's weight leaned heavy against him, his chest still heaving, each breath a ragged pull, but he was alive, stubbornly so. On Ethan's other side, Officer Kevin Hayes stumbled, his legs weak, his balance uncertain, but his grip on his sidearm never loosened. He clung to that weapon the way a drowning man clings to driftwood, not from aggression, but as an anchor to stay conscious. Ahead, the outline of Ethan's family farm appeared through the mist, a low spread of wooden fences, fields washed silver by moonlight, and a weathered house whose paint had long since surrendered to wind and time. A small barn stood beside it, slanted and scarred but dependable. This was where Ethan came to find silence when his mind got too loud. Tonight, that silence would become sanctuary. The front porch light flickered, a glow as soft as a heartbeat. The door opened before Ethan even reached it. Martha Delaney stepped out, framed by lamplight. She was in her late 60s, tall and wiry, her silver hair coiled into a bun that never stayed put. Strands had escaped to halo a face carved by time but lit by fierce intelligence. Her wool cardigan hung loosely over strong arms, sleeves rolled to the elbows, her blue eyes sharp enough to strip pretense bare. "Good Lord," she breathed when she saw them, Ethan, mud-streaked and sweat-soaked, supporting two half-conscious men. But there was no panic in her tone, only command. Get them inside. Don't you dare bleed all over my rug. Ethan obeyed, easing Brooks onto the old couch near the fireplace while Hayes collapsed into a chair, coughing. The farmhouse smelled of chamomile and wood smoke, simple, grounding scents. Martha moved fast, fetching a tin first aid box and a metal basin of water. She knelt beside Brooks, her hands steady even as she pressed a cloth to his torn wrists. You're lucky he found you, she muttered, nodding toward Ethan. Another few minutes, and you'd have been ghost stories by dawn. Brooks winced but managed a horse. We were transporting a witness, ambushed out of nowhere. Masks. Guns. They moved like they'd trained for it. We didn't stand a chance. Martha gave him a sip of water, her expression unreadable. Hayes tried to speak, voice cracking. They weren't random. Too organized. They jammed our radios. They knew our route. Whoever they were, they wanted us alive, for a while. Martha's jaw tightened. Cain, she muttered. Ethan looked up. Victor Cain. She nodded grimly. That name's been crawling through Ashton's shadows for years. Gunrunner. Smuggler. A devil with polite manners. Folks said he disappeared after that police raid, but men like Cain don't vanish, they wait. Brooks exchanged a heavy glance with Hayes. 2 months ago, we seized a weapons shipment with Cain's name buried in the files. We never found him, but if he thinks we cost him money, he didn't finish. The silence did it for him. Rex suddenly growled from the doorway, deep, warning, vibrating through the floorboards. Ethan moved to the window, scanning the tree lean. Nothing visible, but the shepherd's hackles were up. His instincts were never wrong. He's telling us the night's not finished, Ethan said quietly. Martha didn't flinch. She kept working, cleaning wounds with firm, sure hands. Drink this, she ordered Hayes, handing him a steaming mug that smelled of honey and herbs. Keep your eyes open. You can sleep when you're not bleeding. Then she turned her stare on Ethan. Don't stand there brooding like it's boot camp again. Get me clean linens. If Cain's got men nearby, you'll need these two on their feet fast. Ethan moved as told, mind grinding with calculation. If Cain had returned, the farm was already in danger. This wasn't coincidence. This was message. They worked until nearly midnight. Brooks's wrists were bandaged, Hayes's ankle wound wrapped tight. The clock ticked steady against the low murmur of wind. Outside, the cicadas screamed once, then fell silent, that hollow pause before something happens. Rex sat by the door, unmoving, his amber eyes trained on the dark fields. The faint rumble of distant engines reached Ethan's ears, or maybe it was his heart, remembering how to anticipate. He kept his rifle propped by the window. Whatever was coming, they wouldn't be caught unprepared again. Morning came gray and uneasy, dragging mist across the fields like a veil. The world looked softer than it felt. Ethan stood on the porch, arms crossed, scanning the horizon. His uniform hung loose with last night's dirt, but his posture was rigid, alert, listening. Beside him sat Rex, still as carved stone, nose working the damp air. The shepherd's ears flicked toward the north fence, where dew-soaked grass bent unnaturally, as if someone had walked there hours ago. Ethan crouched, hand pressing lightly on Rex's back, acknowledging the warning. Inside, Officer Brooks was testing his strength again, bracing one hand on the wall as he stood. His frame filled the narrow room, still powerful, though the bruises across his chest glowed like dark brands. I can stand, he said, brushing off Martha's attempt to push him back down. His voice was gravel but steady, the voice of a man who refused to stay broken. Officer Hayes appeared from the kitchen, pale but more stable. His sandy hair was damp, his gray-blue eyes restless. He carried a cup of black coffee, both hands wrapped around it as if it held him together. "We can't stay," he said bluntly. "If Cain sent those men, he knows we're alive. He'll finish what he started." Ethan's reply came quiet but final. "Then we don't wait. We prepare." By mid-morning, the sound of gravel crunching announced a visitor. Tom Weaver, the mail carrier for Ashton, appeared at the gate, panting slightly from the climb. In his 50s, with thinning red hair and a friendly belly that spoke of too many biscuits, Tom was a man who carried more news than letters. "Ethan," he said in a hush, glancing nervously over his shoulder. "There've been strangers in town asking about Brooks and Hayes. Big fellas. Drove a black SUV. Offered cash for information." His eyes darted again. They didn't look like drifters. They looked like men used to giving orders. Brooks straightened, jaw tight. Hayes's grip whitened on his coffee cup. Martha stepped forward, cardigan sleeves rolled back. Her eyes, bright and cold, fixed on Tom. "I told you, Cain doesn't disappear. He plants seeds first. Then he harvests fear." Tom nodded miserably. "I shouldn't even be here. But I figured you needed to know. People in town, they're scared. Lock your doors." And with that, he trudged off, shoulders hunched like a man who'd spoken too much truth. That afternoon, the farm transformed from refuge to fortress. Ethan led the work like a commander prepping for siege. He paced the property line, sketching defenses in the dirt with a stick, choke points, cover zones, firing arcs. Brooks followed, carrying a borrowed rifle despite the ache in his ribs. Hayes checked his sidearm for the 10th time, every click loud in the tense air. Martha fortified the farmhouse from the inside, filling kerosene lamps, gathering heavy quilts, boiling water. Ethan caught her muttering about disinfectant, but he suspected the pots could serve another purpose if it came to it. She wasn't the sort to run, not after losing 2 sons to wars she hadn't chosen. Rex was everywhere, scenting posts, circling the barn, testing wind direction. When dusk fell, he froze at the southern fence, muscles tight, nose pointed into the trees. Ethan jogged over and found them, boot prints. Wide. Fresh. Rex barked once, sharp and clean, then went silent. Ethan scanned the shadows, saw nothing, but he knew what it meant. They were being watched. By nightfall, the house stood armed and waiting. Windows were boarded with planks and hay bales stacked behind them for cover. A faint lamplight glowed in the kitchen, just enough to cast shadows like ghosts moving across the walls. Inside, Brooks cleaned his rifle with methodical care. Hayes rigged tin cans filled with pebbles along the porch, a makeshift alarm line. Martha stirred stew in the pot, her expression unreadable. Ethan stood by the front window, eyes on the horizon. Rex paced the porch, nails tapping the wood in a steady rhythm. Every few minutes, he paused, growled low, and listened again. The air thickened with the kind of tension that precedes violence. "They'll come," Ethan said finally, voice like gravel on steel. Brooks didn't look up. "Then we'll be ready." Outside, the shepherd lifted his head toward the open fields and barked once, loud, defiant, echoing into the darkness. It was less a sound than a message. The farm was awake. And it would not fall quietly. Night came down heavy and full, spreading like ink across the fields. The farmhouse crouched in that darkness, its silhouette sharp against the faint shimmer of the moon. The air carried the smell of cut hay and damp soil, clean, but threaded with the metallic tang of anticipation. Somewhere far off, an owl called once, and then even that sound died. Inside, the lamps were out. Only the faint red glow of embers in the fireplace gave shape to the room. Ethan Cole sat by the front window, rifle balanced across his knees. His breathing was slow, measured. The Marine training in him had never left, the ability to listen through silence, to feel the air shift when danger drew near. Beside the door, Rex paced, his paws whispering against the floorboards. Every few seconds he'd stop, sniff the air, and let out a quiet rumble deep in his chest, not a warning yet, but close. The shepherd's black and tan coat gleamed faintly under the dim light, every muscle alert, waiting. Across the room, Officer Daniel Brooks sat cleaning his weapon with slow precision. His massive frame seemed to take up all the light left in the house. The bruises across his ribs had darkened into ugly purples, but his movements were steady, deliberate. He'd been shot at before. He'd seen worse. But tonight felt different, more personal. "We hold the line," Brooks said softly, his deep voice carrying the weight of promise. Officer Kevin Hayes crouched by the back door, checking the tin can trip alarms one more time. His hands trembled slightly, not from fear exactly, but from the electric charge of adrenaline that came before every fight. "You think they'll come tonight?" he asked, his voice thin but firm. "They're already out there," Ethan murmured, eyes fixed on the fields. Rex's ears pricked sharply. A second later, the night answered. The low growl of an engine rolled over the distance. Tires crunched gravel. Headlights flickered, then vanished. The engines cut, leaving a silence that screamed louder than noise. Ethan rose to his feet. Brooks followed, chambering around with practiced calm. Then came the first shout, muffled, hard-edged, followed by the staccato crack of gunfire. Muzzle flashes tore open the night, scattering sparks across the yard. "Down!" Ethan barked. Glass shattered as bullets slammed into the front windows. Wood splintered. Shards rained across the floor. From the kitchen, Martha Delaney's voice cut through the chaos, not panicked, but commanding, sharp as a whip. "Get low and stay there." She wasn't running. She moved to the cellar door, grabbed a shotgun she'd kept hidden for years, the barrel dull with age, but loaded and ready. Her eyes blazed under the lamplight. "I've buried enough good men," she said through clenched teeth. "Not tonight." Ethan dropped to a knee, sighting through the broken window. The rifle felt natural in his hands, like an old rhythm remembered. He exhaled once, steady, then fired, 1, 2, precise shots. A shadowed figure near the fence stumbled backward with a cry. Another man dove for cover behind a truck. Brooks rose beside him, returning fire from the left. His voice carried through the storm of noise. "Left side clear." Hayes darted toward the back of the house, glass crunching under his boots. He fired from the shadows, hitting a moving silhouette near the barn. "They're flanking," he shouted. Ethan shifted position, scanning the yard between shots. Through the chaos, a flicker of movement caught his eye, one of the masked attackers pulling something from a satchel. The glint of glass. The shimmer of fuel. A Molotov cocktail. Before Ethan could shout, the man struck a lighter. And Rex moved. The shepherd exploded through the door, a blur of muscle and fury. He hit the man before the flame could reach the bottle. The fire spilled harmlessly into the mud as Rex's jaws locked onto the attacker's forearm. The man screamed, dropping to his knees. Rex snarled, shaking violently until the arm went limp. "Hold him, Rex!" Ethan shouted, already moving. He reached the doorway, rifle aimed square at the man's chest. "Don't move." The attacker froze, clutching his bleeding arm, before scrambling back into the dark. The rest of the masked men began to fall back, their rhythm breaking. Gunfire still cracked, but it was wild now, scattered. They'd expected an easy target. Instead, they found trained resistance, and a dog that fought like vengeance itself. Ethan crouched beside the porch post, firing controlled bursts into the tree line until the final echo of retreating engines drowned the chaos. Then came stillness, the kind that leaves the air ringing in your ears. Brooks leaned against the wall, chest heaving, sweat slick on his dark skin. Despite the pain in his ribs, a faint grin cut through. "Not bad for a busted Marine and 2 half-dead cops," he muttered, sliding down to sit on the floor. Hayes stumbled in from the back, eyes wide, face streaked with grime. "We held them," he said, voice shaky but proud. "We actually held them." Ethan didn't answer. He stood in the wreckage, glass crunching under his boots, scanning the horizon through what was left of the window. The headlights were gone. The sound of the trucks had faded. But his mind wasn't in the present. It was back years ago, another night, another attack. His wife, Anna, laughing in their kitchen before illness took her. The smell of bread and the sound of her humming. Her hand brushing flour off his cheek. The image cut through him like a blade. He clenched his jaw. He'd lost enough. No more. Rex padded back inside, fur matted with dirt, muzzle streaked red from the fight. He sat beside Ethan, tail sweeping the floor once, amber eyes unflinching. Ethan knelt, resting a hand on the shepherd's neck. "You saved us again," he whispered, voice raw. "This house stands because of you." The farmhouse was a mess, walls torn by bullets, windows gone, the porch riddled with holes, but it still stood. Against all odds, it stood. Inside, 4 survivors breathed in the aftermath, a Marine who couldn't stop fighting, 2 battered cops, an old woman with fire in her bones, and a dog who refused to yield. The smell of gunpowder hung thick in the air, mingling with smoke and damp wood. Outside, the moon shifted through drifting clouds, its light cutting through the haze like a pale, trembling blade. Ethan reloaded his rifle with slow, deliberate care, his hazel eyes still on the darkness beyond the fence. Brooks and Hayes leaned near the window, keeping watch in silence. Martha moved through the room, calm but relentless, sweeping glass aside, reloading her shotgun, preparing for whatever came next. And Rex, always watching, stood again at the porch threshold, nose high, ears tuned to the night. The farm was scarred. But it was alive. The fight wasn't finished. Not yet. The night had gone strangely still. The gunfire had stopped, but silence carried its own weight, heavy, cautious, alive. Smoke curled from the shattered porch beams, glinting faintly in the moonlight. The air was sharp with the smell of gunpowder and burned wood. Ethan Cole stood in the open doorway, rifle lowered but ready, his chest still rising and falling with the slow rhythm of battle come and gone. His uniform was torn, his knuckles bloodied from dragging bodies and boards alike. But his eyes, those calm hazel eyes, were fixed on the darkness beyond the fence. To his right, Officer Brooks leaned against what remained of the porch post. The big man's breathing was rough, his face slick with sweat and streaked with soot. Yet his grip on the shotgun didn't waver. Hayes crouched beside the doorway, his sidearm steady, the faint tremor in his fingers betraying both exhaustion and adrenaline. Rex moved like a shadow across the porch boards, tail stiff, nostrils flaring as he scanned the dark. Every sound, every faint movement pulled his attention, a sentinel in full command of the night. The quiet after chaos was deceptive. Ethan knew it. So did the others. Silence was never safety, it was the pause before something worse. And then Rex barked, once, sharp and deep, the kind of bark that carried certainty. Ethan's head snapped toward the tree line. His eyes adjusted to the low light, and there he saw him. A figure stepped out from the black edge of the woods, walking slowly, confidently. A man whose presence carried weight like a storm cloud. Victor Cain. He wasn't hiding anymore. Tall, broad, wrapped in a black overcoat that gleamed under the thin moonlight, Cain moved with the composure of a man who expected the world to make room for him. His hair, slicked back and damp, caught the faint shimmer of silver at the temples. A deep scar cut down one side of his cheek, disappearing into a neatly trimmed beard streaked with gray. He looked like wealth that had crawled through mud, dangerous, deliberate, alive. Behind him, the woods rippled with faint movement. Shadows, several of them, men shifting position, staying just out of view. Armed. Waiting. Cain stopped a few paces from the broken gate, his pale green eyes lifting toward the farmhouse. When he spoke, his voice was slow and cold, like gravel sliding over steel. "Brooks. Hayes. I told myself I'd watch you crawl before you died. His words carried without shouting. You ruined a lot of years' work. Took what wasn't yours. And now, he smiled faintly, I'll take what's mine back. Brooks straightened, his broad shoulders squaring. Even bruised and battered, the man's presence filled the porch. You should have stayed buried, Cain, he said, voice hoarse but strong. This town doesn't belong to you anymore. Cain's smirk deepened. You really think Ashton's clean? You think the people you protect don't buy from my men? Don't eat from my table? You stopped a shipment, officer. You didn't stop the world. Hayes stepped forward then, his gray-blue eyes hard. You made a mistake coming here yourself. Hiding behind others suits you better. Cain chuckled, low and dangerous. You think this place will save you? You think that washed-up Marine and his mutt can change what's coming? Rex growled, low and steady, his body tense as wire. Cain's hand drifted toward the inside of his coat, a gesture that made every gun in the house rise. Ethan's rifle came up first, trained center mass. His voice, when he spoke, was quiet but cut through the air like a blade. You brought fire to my door, he said. And now you're about to find out it bites back. For a moment, everything hung on the edge of breath, the kind of moment soldiers and killers both understood. One wrong move and the night would ignite again. But Cain wasn't alone. From the corners of the field came movement, dark figures shifting, rifles glinting faintly. The men who'd retreated earlier had circled back, closing the noose. Rex's bark tore through the tension, sharp and furious. He turned his head left, a warning. Someone was trying to flank through the barn. Hayes saw it too, swung his pistol toward the motion, and fired a warning shot that cracked through the air. The shadows froze. Then, from behind Ethan, a sound rose, faint at first, then swelling, sirens. Faint blue and red lights began to flicker on the far hills. Police cruisers, speeding down the old road. Ashton's reinforcements, drawn by the gunfire and the chaos. Cain's head turned slightly, jaw clenching as he calculated. He'd waited years for revenge, but not even he could fight the entire county tonight. His expression twisted, rage flashing across those pale eyes like lightning. You'll bleed for this, he hissed. Every one of you. This isn't over. He raised one hand, a signal. The men in the shadows melted backward into the tree lean. Engines roared to life somewhere beyond the dark. Within moments, the trucks were gone, swallowed by the night. Ethan kept his rifle raised until the last echo of tires faded. Rex stayed poised, eyes locked on the tree lean, his growl fading slowly into silence. Then came the light, the wash of red and blue as police cruisers swept up the dirt lane. Headlights sliced through smoke and dust, catching the broken boards, the spent shells, and the faces of the four who had survived. Sheriff Raymond Hull climbed out of the lead cruiser. Tall, wiry, gray-haired, his uniform pressed even at midnight, the old lawman carried the air of someone who'd been through too many nights like this. His face was lined with exhaustion and wisdom in equal measure. He took in the scene with one long look, the bullet holes, the shattered windows, the weary but standing survivors. Then his gaze landed on Ethan. Cole, he said simply. You kept them breathing. Ethan nodded once, quiet. Barely. Hull's attention shifted to Brooks and Hayes. We heard the call too late. Your names cleared themselves tonight. Behind the sheriff, deputies dragged several men from the second cruiser, bruised, handcuffed, and bleeding. Among them, held firmly by two officers, was Victor Cain. His overcoat was torn, his lip split, his scar shining raw under the flashing lights. But his glare was still venom. Even defeated, he exuded danger, like a snake that hadn't yet decided if it was dead. Sheriff Hull stepped close, voice calm but edged with iron. Victor Cain, you're under arrest for attempted murder, assault on officers, and enough federal charges to fill a book. Cain's jaw flexed. You can cage me, Sheriff, he said quietly, but you can't kill what I built. Hull leaned close. You already did that yourself. He nodded to his men, and they hauled Cain toward the waiting cruiser. The engine roared, kicking up dust as they turned toward the main road. The red and blue lights swept across the farmhouse, over Brooks's bruised face, Hayes's exhausted grin, and Martha's lined, proud expression as she leaned on her shotgun, daring the world to try again. Ethan lowered his rifle at last. His arms ached, but his stance didn't falter. Rex sat beside him, fur matted, chest rising with each deep breath, eyes glowing gold in the patrol lights. They had survived the storm. But Ethan knew, deep in the quiet center of himself, that survival wasn't the same as peace. Not yet. He reached down, resting a hand on Rex's head. We're still here, boy, he murmured. Still standing. The shepherd's tail gave a slow, heavy thump against the floor, not joy, not triumph, but understanding. The night had bled itself out. Dawn, fragile and gray, began to rise. The first light of dawn spilled gently across the hills of Ashton, thin and silver at first, then warming to gold as it touched the fields. Smoke still drifted from the battered porch of Ethan Cole's farmhouse, curling through the shattered wood beams like ghosts reluctant to leave. The storm of violence had passed, but the world wore its scars plainly, splintered boards, broken glass glittering in the grass, bullet holes puncturing the walls like silent testimonies. Ethan stood at the edge of the porch, rifle lowered but still in his hands, his body straight though his muscles screamed. His uniform was stiff with dried sweat and dirt, sleeves rolled high, his calm hazel eyes fixed on the horizon. He wasn't watching for enemies now, not exactly. He was watching to make sure the dawn was real. Beside him, Rex sat close, his black and tan coat streaked with dust and ash. The shepherd's chest rose and fell slowly, his body worn but proud. His amber eyes stayed on Ethan, as if waiting for the signal to stand down, but until his master gave it, he would not rest. In the yard below, a cluster of police cruisers idled, their red and blue lights fading in the growing sunlight. Officers moved through the wreckage with practiced care, gathering shell casings, photographing tire tracks, checking the wounded. Their clipped voices carried across the morning, echoing through the open fields. At the center of it all stood Sheriff Raymond Hull, tall, wiry, every inch of him carved from 40 years of hard service. His gray hair glinted under the light, his face lined and weary but unbroken. He was the kind of man who'd seen too many endings and not enough peace. His boots crunched over gravel as he approached the porch, his gaze sweeping over Ethan, Brooks, and Hayes, 3 men still standing after the longest night Ashton had seen in years. Behind the sheriff, 2 deputies hauled Victor Cain forward in chains. The once powerful smuggler was nearly unrecognizable, coat torn, cheek split, eyes burning with a poisonous fury that hadn't dimmed with defeat. Even restrained, his presence drew unease like static. Cain spat blood into the dirt, his pale green eyes finding Brooks and Hayes on the porch. You think this ends with me in a cell, he rasped. You think you've saved anyone? Brooks straightened, his barrel chest rising beneath a torn shirt. You're done, Cain, he said, voice rough but steady. You've lost your empire, your men, your name. There's nothing left to fear. Cain's lip curled into something that might have been a smile. There's always something left to fear. Sheriff Hull stepped between them. His voice was low, patient, but made of stone. Victor Cain, you're finished in Ashton. Your men are dead or running, and your reach ends here. You'll spend the rest of your life answering for every name written in your shadow. For a heartbeat, Cain said nothing. Then he leaned closer, whispering just loud enough for Ethan to hear. Men like you don't stop the world turning, soldier. You just slow it down. Ethan's stare didn't waver. Sometimes that's enough. Hull nodded to his deputies, and Cain was shoved into the back of a cruiser. The door slammed shut with a final, echoing thud, like a book closing. As the police began to clear the scene, Hull turned back to the men on the porch. Brooks. Hayes, he said, his voice lifting so the gathered officers could hear. You've walked through fire to bring this man down. You've bled for the badge and for the truth. Ashton City owes you both more than medals. He paused, his tone softening. Your names will be cleared. Your records restored. You didn't fall tonight. You stood when others would have run. For a moment, no one spoke. Brooks's jaw flexed, his dark eyes reflecting both pride and exhaustion. Hayes's hand trembled slightly where it rested on his thigh. Relief, raw and real, flickered across his features like light through a cracked window. Ethan took a step forward, his voice calm but carrying across the yard. Sheriff, he said, with respect, the real hero of tonight isn't wearing a badge. Every head turned as Ethan glanced down. Rex, seated at his feet, looked up, ears perked, eyes glowing gold in the morning sun. The dog's fur was singed in places, one ear still nicked from an old scar, his muzzle damp from the fight. Yet he sat proud, steady, as if the chaos of the night hadn't touched him at all. Ethan's hand rested gently on the shepherd's head. He saved all of us, he said. That's the kind of loyalty you can't teach. A murmur rippled through the crowd, quiet admiration. A few of the officers smiled. Others simply nodded. Even hardened men knew what it meant to see courage in another creature's eyes. Sheriff Holt tipped his hat toward the dog. Then Ashton owes him too, he said. From the farmhouse door, Martha Delaney appeared, silver hair untamed, cardigan sleeves rolled to her elbows. She carried a tray balanced on one arm, the smell of butter and fresh cornbread wafting through the cooling air. It's not much, she said briskly, setting the tray down on the railing, but a fight like that deserves something warm to remember it by. Brooks chuckled lowly, breaking off a piece of cornbread. Ma'am, this might be the best breakfast I've ever earned. Hayes grinned tiredly. I'll second that, though I'll take 3 pieces. Just in case. Even Sheriff Hole allowed himself a small smile as he accepted one, his sharp eyes still scanning the horizon. Ethan sat down on the steps beside Rex. He tore off a piece of cornbread, offered it to the shepherd, and watched as the dog took it gently, chewing with calm dignity. The warmth of the morning settled slowly over them, fragile, but real. Around them, the others ate in silence. Not the awkward silence of strangers, but the deep, full silence of people who had survived something together. The farmhouse still bore its wounds, shattered glass glittered in the grass, holes in the walls let the wind whisper through, but those inside it were whole. For the first time in a long while, Ethan let himself breathe. Really breathe. He looked at the horizon, where sunlight painted the fields gold. Brooks stood nearby, leaning on the porch rail, the light catching on the faint rope marks around his wrists. Hayes laughed softly at something Martha said, the sound unguarded, boyish even. Sheriff Hole stood with his hands on his hips, eyes thoughtful, expression unreadable. And Rex, loyal, unyielding Rex, lay at Ethan's boots, head resting across his bootlaces, tail thumping once, slow and content. Ethan reached down, fingers brushing the shepherd's fur. You kept us alive, old boy, he whispered. Don't ever let anyone tell you different. Rex exhaled a slow, rumbling sound, not a growl, not a sigh, something between, a sound that felt like understanding. The sun rose higher, spilling orange light across the battered porch, catching the sheen of Martha's tray, glinting off the sheriff's badge, flickering through the smoke, and crowning Rex's coat with gold. It wasn't triumph that filled the air, it was peace. Hard-won, fragile, and deeply earned. For the first time since the war, Ethan Cole allowed himself a faint smile. The fight was over. And the world, scarred and battered though it was, felt good again. 2 weeks later, Ashton had quieted. The kind of quiet that followed storms, uneasy at first, then settling into something resembling peace. The farmhouse, once broken and scarred, now stood like a survivor wearing its bruises proudly. The windows had been replaced, the porch patched, and the scent of fresh paint lingered faintly beneath the smell of earth and hay. Ethan Cole leaned against the porch railing, mug of coffee warming his calloused hands. He looked out over the fields, now washed in the golden hue of late morning. The world had returned to its rhythm, tractors in the distance, birds calling from the oaks, wind slipping through wheat. But inside Ethan, the echoes of gunfire hadn't quite faded. Beside him, Rex lay sprawled in the sun, tail flicking lazily. The shepherd's fur had healed where the cuts had been, though a faint scar still marked his flank, a reminder of the night that nearly ended everything. His eyes half closed, but his ears twitched at every sound, ever alert even in rest. Martha Delaney emerged from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron, her silver hair escaping from its bun as usual. "If you don't start sleeping, Ethan, I'll dose your coffee with valerian root," she said, her voice brisk but kind. Ethan smiled faintly, eyes still on the fields. "You'd have to catch me first." She raised an eyebrow. "You're fast, son, but I'm older, I've learned tricks." From inside, the sound of laughter drifted through the open window. Officer Hayes sat at the table, one ankle bandaged, scribbling something into a notebook. Across from him, Brooks was helping fix the radio that had been shattered during the fight, his big hand surprisingly gentle with the wires. The two had become a strange kind of pair, bonded by the storm, their banter carrying the easy rhythm of brothers who'd fought the same war. "Try it now," Brooks said, tightening a screw. The radio crackled to life, humming with faint static before a soft country tune filtered through. Hayes grinned wide. "You're a genius." Brooks chuckled. "No, I just hate silence." Martha's expression softened as she listened. "That's the sound of life getting back on its feet," she murmured. Ethan nodded slightly. "It's strange," he said. "After everything, it almost feels too normal." Martha looked at him, her eyes sharp. "Normal's just another word for peace, son. You've earned it. Stop waiting for the next war." He didn't answer right away. His gaze drifted to the old oak tree at the edge of the field, the one that had stood for generations, through storms and droughts alike. He'd used to sit there with Anna, back before deployments, before the nightmares that followed. She'd told him peace wasn't the absence of pain, it was learning to live with it without letting it drown you. Ethan exhaled softly. "She'd have liked this morning," he said. Martha followed his gaze. "She'd be proud of you," she said simply. "Both of you." Her eyes flicked to Rex, who thumped his tail once in quiet agreement. By afternoon, the yard was alive with movement again. Sheriff Hull had driven out from town, his cruiser kicking up a trail of dust that shimmered in the sunlight. He parked by the barn and stepped out, hat in hand, the same measured calm about him that he carried everywhere. "Morning, folks," he called as he climbed the porch steps. "Smells like coffee and peace, can't decide which I like more." Martha poured him a cup before he could ask. "Peace costs more to brew," she said wryly. Hull chuckled, accepting it. "That it does." Ethan joined him at the railing. "How's Ashton holding up?" The sheriff leaned against the post. "Better than I expected. Cain's arrest shook a lot of trees. We've got half a dozen of his men in custody, the rest either running or turning on each other. Federal boys took him this morning. They'll dig up everything he ever touched." "Good," Ethan said quietly. Hull nodded, studying him. "You know, folks in town still talk about that night. Some say the ghost of a Marine and his dog saved Ashton. Others say it was the dog who led the fight." Ethan's mouth twitched. "They're half right." Hull smiled, eyes warm beneath his brim. "Either way, you did something rare, gave people back their sense of safety. You planning to stay?" Ethan glanced toward the fields, the barn, the house that had somehow survived 2 wars, one fought overseas, one right here. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think I am." Hull straightened, setting his empty cup on the railing. "Then Ashton just got itself 2 new deputies," he said. Unofficially, of course. Ethan raised an eyebrow. 2. Hole nodded toward Rex, who had lifted his head, watching them both. He's got better instincts than half the department. Martha laughed, the sound clear and bright. That's the first true thing you've said all day. Hole tipped his hat, smiling. Take care of this place, Cole. Peace is a fragile thing. But when it roots deep enough, it can outlast the storms. He descended the steps, boots crunching on gravel, and climbed back into his cruiser. As the engine faded down the dirt road, the quiet returned, but this time, it was the good kind. That evening, the four of them gathered by the barn. The sky was painted in streaks of orange and pink, the air soft with the smell of hay and wildflowers. Brooks stood by the fence, rolling up his sleeves as he hammered a new board into place. Hayes leaned nearby, a pencil tucked behind his ear, sketching the repaired farmhouse in his notebook. Martha tended to a pot over a small fire, humming an old tune from a time before the wars. Her voice wove through the air like memory itself. Ethan sat on an overturned crate beside Rex, watching the horizon. Feels almost wrong, he said quietly. To feel, still. Brooks looked over his shoulder. Still ain't bad, Marine. Still means breathing. Hayes nodded. And breathing means we made it. Ethan smiled faintly, gaze lowering to Rex. The shepherd's eyes glowed in the dim light, reflecting the fire. Yeah, he said softly. We made it. The wind shifted, carrying the scent of rain from the west. Fireflies began to blink in the tall grass. The day faded into twilight, and the farmhouse lights flickered on one by one, like distant stars returning home. For a long moment, no one spoke. The world didn't need words right then. Ethan leaned back, feeling the rough wood against his shoulders, and exhaled deeply. The fight, the fear, the pain, all of it still lived somewhere in the cracks of his memory, but it no longer owned him. Rex pressed his head lightly against Ethan's knee, letting out a soft sigh, the sound of a guardian finally allowing himself to rest. Home, Ethan whispered, as the first crickets began their nightly song. The word felt strange on his tongue. But it felt right. Months passed, and summer rolled gently into fall. The fields around the Cole farmhouse shimmered in shades of gold and amber, the air carrying the sweet scent of hay and cool earth. The wounds of that terrible night had faded, not gone, but healed into stories whispered by the wind. Ethan Cole stood at the edge of the pasture, boots sunk into the soil, his gaze sweeping across the horizon. The farm had changed. What was once a quiet piece of land had grown into something larger, a living, breathing refuge. A place for those who'd been through battles of their own, both visible and unseen. A wooden sign hung by the gate now, hand-carved and simple. The Haven, for soldiers and strays. The name had been Martha's idea, and it fit. Beyond the gate, laughter echoed. Two young veterans, one missing part of his right leg, the other with a service dog named Luna, were repairing a fence near the barn. Their movements were slow but sure, the easy rhythm of people rebuilding themselves through work. Brooks was teaching them, sleeves rolled high, the hammer swinging with the effortless strength of a man who'd finally found purpose again. Hayes sat on the porch steps, notebook in hand, a fresh badge clipped to his belt. Sheriff Hole had brought him back onto the force officially, his record cleared, his courage recognized. But even with his badge restored, Hayes spent most of his time here, helping run the Haven. From the open barn door, the sounds of dogs filled the air, barks, yips, tails thumping against wood. A dozen rescued dogs of all shapes and sizes roamed the fenced yard, mutts and shepherds, retrievers, terriers. Some had come from shelters, others from abandoned yards or old war zones overseas. And in the center of them all, like a king among kin, lay Rex. His muzzle had turned grayer over the months, the fur around his eyes soft with age. But his posture was still proud, his gaze still sharp. The other dogs seemed to move around him naturally, as if he were their compass, their leader and protector. Ethan crouched beside the fence, resting his forearms on the top rail. "They follow him," he said quietly, watching as Rex nudged a limping puppy toward a bowl of water. "Every single one." Martha appeared beside him, wiping her hands on a flour-dusted towel. "They follow strength that doesn't need to prove itself," she said. "Same as people." Ethan smiled faintly. "You're saying he's got more sense than I ever did." "I'm saying he always did." They both watched in silence for a moment as the dogs played. The late afternoon sun dipped lower, turning the world honey-colored. Martha spoke again, softer now. "When I first came to this house, I thought it'd seem too much pain to hold peace again. I was wrong." She looked at him, her blue eyes bright beneath her silver hair. "You and that dog turned grief into purpose, Ethan. That's a rare gift." He looked back at the barn, where Brooks was laughing at something one of the younger vets said. Hayes was tossing a stick to a retriever who missed every catch but kept trying anyway. Even the air felt lighter here, like the land itself had exhaled after years of holding its breath. Ethan nodded slowly. "We all needed saving," he said. "Maybe that's what this place is really for." Martha smiled. "Then it's working." Later that evening, as dusk settled over Ashton, the farmhouse glowed with soft lamplight. The table was set with bowls of stew, fresh bread, and laughter, real laughter that filled every corner of the home. Brooks raised his glass halfway. "To the haven," he said, voice carrying that gravel-deep warmth. "To second chances." Hayes clinked his cup against it. "To friends who turned into family." Martha added, "And to dogs who remind us what loyalty looks like." Ethan chuckled, his gaze falling to Rex, who sat by the fireplace, head resting on his paws. The shepherd's eyes were half closed, but one ear twitched at every voice, as if he refused to miss a single word. "To all of it," Ethan said quietly. He lifted his glass and drank. They ate as the night deepened. The fire crackled, the clock ticked softly, and somewhere outside, the chorus of crickets swelled. There was peace here, not the fragile kind that could be broken by noise, but the kind built by endurance, stitched together through loss, trust, and shared survival. When the plates were cleared and the lights dimmed, Ethan stepped outside, drawn to the open quiet of the yard. The sky stretched wide and full of stars, the kind you only saw when the world stopped moving. The air was cool, the fields whispering with the faint sound of leaves. Rex followed, as he always did, padding silently to Ethan's side. Ethan knelt, one hand resting on the shepherd's neck. "You did it, boy," he said softly. "You gave them all a home." Rex pressed closer, leaning his weight against him, a small, quiet gesture of understanding. The old dog's eyes caught the starlight, glowing faintly gold. Ethan looked out toward the gate, the sign barely visible in the darkness. The haven. He thought of the faces who'd come and gone, soldiers broken by war, dogs broken by abandonment, all finding a piece of themselves here. He exhaled slowly, a breath that carried years of heaviness. "Guess we both found what we were looking for," he murmured. Rex's tail brushed once against the grass. A shooting star tore across the sky, vanishing behind the tree line. The moment hung there, simple, fleeting, but perfect. From the house, Martha's voice drifted out through the open window. "Ethan. You'll catch cold if you sleep out there again." He smiled, his voice quiet but sure. "Not tonight, Martha." He stayed where he was, the night wrapped around him like an old friend. Rex shifted, resting his head against Ethan's knee, and together they watched the sky until the stars blurred into dawn. Months later. A small crowd gathered by the gate, cameras flashing softly in the morning sun. A news crew from Ashton was there to film the dedication ceremony, the official recognition of the haven for soldiers and strays. A plaque now stood beneath the wooden sign, engraved with simple words. Founded by Sergeant Ethan Cole and his K-9 partner, Rex, for every soul who's fought and still finds the strength to love. Brooks spoke first, his deep voice steady. Some heroes wear uniforms. Some walk on 4 legs. But every one of them deserves a place to heal. Hayes stepped forward, adjusting his badge with a proud grin. The world needs more havens, and more men like them. Martha, standing tall despite her years, added with a soft smile, "You don't have to be a soldier to fight for peace. You just have to keep your heart open long enough to see it." When the applause came, Ethan didn't stand in front of the cameras. He stood behind them, hands in his pockets, watching quietly as Rex lay by the fence, tail sweeping the dirt, eyes shining. He didn't need recognition. The farm spoke for itself. The laughter, the healed hearts, the wagging tails, they were his medals. Ethan crouched beside Rex, voice low, meant for only one listener. "We did it, partner." The shepherd's ears perked once. His gaze turned toward the fields, wide, open, and forever free. And together, man and dog looked out over the haven, the sun breaking over the hills, painting the world in gold once more. Home. At last, it truly was.